Eva, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I mean, let's start with the thanks, actually. And I do actually really want to say massive thank you to the London Short Film Festival and obviously Lighthouse and the BFI for sponsoring the event. So it is an honor. So thank you so much. And on top of it, everybody else who came and some people who actually were involved in the films and some people who go back way in my past. So it's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. That is such a beautiful and moving collection of films, and it was really wonderful to see them all together in a group like that. And I think what we saw just now was basically chronological from The Intimacy of Strangers that you made in 2005, and that was a development lab at the NFTS that came out of. But I think your filmmaking career started quite a long way before that. So can we start at the beginning and lead us through what brought you to The Intimacy of Strangers?
You mean bore people to death?
Hopefully not.
No, I mean, actually, there was in chronological order, but there were actually also some films missing in the middle. So there was actually a film in between Solitary Love of Cranes and Reindeer. Actually, 2 films. So they were missing in there. But basically, I studied at Goldsmiths, and I studied script writing as well as documentary filmmaking there, and then went on to make fiction shorts. Coming out of Goldsmiths, I mean, one of my films there was bought by Channel 4 and Film 4, and then I actually went to the BBC, and I worked there for 5 years as a promotions director in the creative services department, and then left to go to the NFTS after that.
So was that quite a big decision to move out of that commercial world?
It was, or actually, if I remember it correctly, it was actually really scary. I mean, I loved my time at the BBC in so many ways, but there is also something about big organizations that actually institutionalize you. And I remember the first day at the NFTS, and I was actually phoning somebody who I knew, who I worked with at the BBC, and I was saying, did I leave the BBC for this? And they're saying, no, you're using this as an excuse to leave the BBC, to actually get back to your own filmmaking. And in many ways, that was true. However much I loved being at the BBC, I really wanted to go back to my own filmmaking, but I wasn't sure 100%. So the NFTS was a wonderful just space to actually just see if I still wanted to make films.
Well, right from The Intimacy of Strangers, what we've seen tonight, there's such a striking visual style to your filmmaking, and it's very it's rich in both its sound and the visuals, the cinematography. Do you think that your experience in fiction and commercials influenced your documentary making style, or not at all?
You know, that isn't. I hated the question when you emailed me that. I should have told you.
And I said you could tell me if you hated anything.
You know, it's hard. I mean, anything influences you and anything kind of feeds into. And absolutely, I mean, obviously, what I did before the BBC, what I did at the BBC, what I did at the NFTS, that all kind of feed into each other and hopefully kind of evolve as a style. But I also have to be honest that I actually, I think Intimacy of Strangers is a really interesting film in the sense that I actually think it's flawed. I mean, I really love it and I'm very proud of it, but I actually think it's a flawed film. But I also know that I was thinking incredibly hard how I wanted to shoot it. I mean, we had, I think, 7 to 8 cinematographers working on that. So it was really important to actually set a visual style, and I spent a lot of time thinking about why do I want to shoot this that way or this way, and what does it actually mean, and what am I trying to say with the pictures. I'm sure some of that came from the previous experience, but I also was actually just very much actually just sitting down and analyzing what I wanted to say with the film and how I could possibly and hopefully express that in a visual sense.
Well, I love the humour and the humanity together in that film, but can I push you on what you see as the flaws? Or is that unfair?
It is unfair. God, it's my retrospective. You're supposed to be nice.
I said I loved it. I love it.
The flaws, I shouldn't have brought it up. There are no flaws in my work. They're wonderful.
Okay.
You know, I think storytelling, it could have been tighter, it could have been shorter. The elements I really, really love. It was a really hard film. And that's why I'm so proud of it. But it's also a film that's almost, you know, there were real conversations. And it was a puzzle piece in the edit. And to make it work, and we spent so much time in the edit. And trying so many different ways, from paper edits to anything else. But fundamentally, they were not scripted, they were real conversations, and to make and actually tell a story out of them in itself, I don't know if we necessarily, I think the beginning of the film is actually what I find the weakest in it, but other people really like it, so it's you know, we look at our films and we see flaws, and I think it's flawed, but it's fine. Let's move on.
I think you might be prone to seeing flaws in your own work.
Yeah.
These really strong themes of love and romance and heartache and dating and relationships in that, did you go into the film intending to draw that out, or did you find it in the material?
I actually originally had the idea, weirdly enough, actually, when I was still at the BBC, and I had very little to do because I was an in-house director and actually didn't do anything for a year. I just sat around in an office. And it was... Oh, yeah, it was right. It was well paid. And no, but I mean, it's true though. I had the idea there, and it was just in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, the first one. And but at the time I was sitting on a bus and I was overhearing a mobile phone conversation, and it was actually about a security scare, and like the bus was delayed, and I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to see what people would actually talk about on the day we finally actually go to war? And that was really the genesis of this idea. But then I started, I mean, first of all, at the time I was still at the BBC, I couldn't have really made it. It would have been a massive logistical undertaking. But it got me started, and then I was thinking about what does the mobile phone actually do to us, our modern technology. And so I moved very early on at the treatment stage to actually say I wanted to tell this modern day love story told through overheard mobile phone conversation. And I guess partly that was because what fascinates me about the film is basically the blurring of the public and the private, and also about intimacy and distance, and how we can basically tell these incredibly intimate stories to the people who we don't know, these strangers sitting next to us, but at the same time we are so separate from the people we're actually saying it to. So that came very early, and it was something which was in my treatment, and I actually think is coming across in the film. At the same time, I also have to be completely honest, the film could have ended up in so many different ways, because in the end we were out in these places, and it was kind of, what kind of conversations do we get? And we also got loads of incredibly funny work conversations, and at one point we were trying to get them into the film as well, like people, and there were these funny moments of like this guy saying, oh, I think I'm being filmed, I hope my boss doesn't see me later on the news because I'm actually skiving off work. And so we actually had a really good work narrative, but it just didn't fit with the film, and it kind of. But yeah, I guess because I wanted to explore that intimacy and distancing in the way we live in cities. So that's kind of where I started and kind of carried on. I mean, that's where Solitary Life of Cranes came from.
Well, there's such a strong relationship between them. I mean, differences as well, but that idea of seeing the intimate lives of people without actually directly engaging with them comes through so strongly. Is that a kind of a voyeurism that you're drawn to?
Never. Yeah, I mean, that was another question I didn't like. My God, I should have told you.
You should have told me.
No, I mean, I could be, voyeurism is part of cinema and part of film. But I mean, completely honest, I loved overhearing all these conversations, and I really loved looking at all these peoples in their flats. It does really attract me to do it, and it's something that is reoccurring in my films. I guess that's kind of perspective from the outsider looking at society. So definitely, but I mean, Solitary Life of Cranes for me really, again, the starting point was really about that idea that there is this community and these people up there who are separate from us, but they have this incredibly intimate insight into our life, but we are not aware of them. And that is and it's also about being intimate but distant. So it was very much, I mean, out of all the films, that's like the clearest kind of link from Intimacy of Strangers to Solitary Life of Cranes. I was really trying to explore the same themes and also, I mean, in the sense, I think the films they're different visually, but they're also very linked. And that, again, came out of that. There's like, okay, how do I express that?
The observations that the crane drivers make in The Solitary Life of Cranes are so profound, so uncliched. And I wondered whether it took whether there was a long interview process getting to those, or whether spending that much time thinking about life down below kind of leads you to that profoundness.
And I have to make a joke here because I promised I would. So my interviews are very long. And I interviewed a lot. I mean, there are approximately 300 crane drivers in London. And I didn't speak to all 300, but I did meet a lot of them. And I went to bars and pubs, and I met them after work, I met them during work. And I talked to a lot of them. And I have to say, I mean, I think they're the most beautiful people. And it was an absolute joy. And then I kind of interviewed probably 20 to 30. And my interviews are very long. And there are more conversations. So like each lasts at least an hour, 2 hours, and I talk as much as they talk because I'm not interested in them. I guess, no, I'm interested in them. What I meant is, oh my God, that sounded terrible. Egotistical director. No, I'm interested. I don't want it to sound like question and answer. Mm-hmm. So therefore I want it to be like a conversation. So therefore I talk a lot, and like I do now, which means I ramble, and it's not very thought out. And so therefore but I actually think it's good. And that's how I like to do my interviews, because I actually think hopefully it just sparks off something in them, and then they go off on their own tangent, and because I actually just want to understand what goes on in their head. Obviously, I'm leading them with my questions, but at the same time, I'm hoping there's this kind of I ramble, and then they will hopefully just say something exciting.
I was going to ask, did those interviews with the cab drivers, the crane drivers, did they take place before or after you were actually going up into the cranes?
So the process, I mean, with Solitary of Like Cranes, I decided that I wanted to do all the interviews beforehand, which didn't quite work out. I mean, we actually did some still during the filming and then after the filming, just because certain drivers weren't available. But I actually wanted, I mean, even like the whole thought process behind the film is like I wanted to start with an audio structure and then actually film. Once I had narrowed this down, we actually had an edit of this to then actually go and film. In the end, it kind of was a bit more of an overlap. And obviously, I had been up on cranes. I had talked to them before, and we did start filming. But it's still, I mean, the editing, it was actually still, we had an audio cut, and then we edit. And then afterwards, we actually started in the picture. And at the time, I thought that was the best way to go, but it became also there's no easy way of doing it. And it was an interesting way to go, and it showed some things, but it also had its own problems.
But it's interesting to hear you say that audio came first, because it seems that there's the cinematography, the visual style of your films is so strong, but actually the sound design is kind of equally as important. And just even in terms of the dialogue, when you hear sync sound, when you don't know who's speaking, that seems to be really different and really important in each of the films. And then going all the way through to Reindeer, when we get no dialogue at all, but you still have the incredible noise of those animals. Just could you talk a bit more about your kind of approach to sound and dialogue?
Sound is incredibly important to me. It's probably my favorite part nowadays. I do love what you can do with sound, and I think I'm just at the beginning, hopefully, of that journey. But that was a gradual process as well. I mean, I always was interested in it, but I loved working on Solitary Love Cranes in terms of the sound post-production. I mean, it was also very long sound post-production. But I love what you can do in terms of changing perspectives, kind of playing around with what you hear and what that actually says. So it is my favorite part. I mean, I love it. I spent like a week or 5 days at Skywalker last summer, and it probably was the highlight of my year. It's kind of like, I love working with sound, and I think spending time in the sound design and the sound mix is incredibly important to me, equally as the visuals.
Okay. I think that we should talk a little bit about some of your projects that you're working on now, and I know that you've got 2 particular projects in different stages of development. You've got the BFI short field study, which is that almost finished?
Field study is, I mean, so we shot that, I mean, it's a short fiction film set in Poland, and we shot that last summer, and we actually had picture lock in September. Unfortunately, I broke my ankle, so that kind of delayed it a little bit. in terms of post-production. But it's actually finished. We just have one more day of audio left, and we're waiting for some music clearance.
And I know you've brought a clip with you to show this evening.
That's the introduction.
Yeah, I was moving us along. But actually, Field Study is the film. But before we go and see that clip from this film, we have to note that that's a fiction film, and you're also developing a fiction feature film. So I think we should address the fact that both of these projects are moving over to the dark side of fiction. Is that the documentary program? Is that a distinct decision for you, or do you feel quite fluid about moving between documentary and fiction?
The right answer. I honestly told you this yesterday on the phone. There was a point where I kind of fell out a little bit out of love with documentary. Or I kind of wanted to challenge myself. I actually felt I was making the same film again and again, and I felt kind of I needed to do something to challenge myself. And I wanted to, and I decided, I wanted to go to more story-driven and character-driven films, but I also then decided I wanted to actually see and try working in fiction again. So it was a conscious decision. I also have to say that actually having made Field Study, and having gone to the Sundance Lab with a fiction feature, weirdly enough, while I loved it, I also rediscovered my love for documentary. So I learned to appreciate documentary again for what it is and the freedom you have. I actually think like the editing of documentary is way more exciting than the editing of fiction. And it's like you're really reinventing the film every day, and that is wonderful. And the same way, actually, when you're filming, and that's something I really learned to appreciate again, and I guess I had kind of forgotten. So in a way, that was wonderful. So I hopefully, the aim is to work in both, and I do definitely still want to make documentaries, and hopefully I can make some fiction films. So
lots of the great directors do move between the two.
Let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best. Well, on that note, here's a clip from Field Study. What can you tell us about what we've just seen? How long's the film? What's it about? Where does this fit in?
Basically, Field Study is based on a short story by Rachel Seifert. It's a 20-minute film. It was, and it's set in Poland. And I was supposed to tell you what the film is about now?
Not if you don't want to.
So basically, it's a story about. For me, it's really a coming-of-age story. It's about a young man who goes to Poland, and I guess comes back differently because he makes the wrong decision. And it's about the pollution of the mind and pollution of rivers.
And we'll wait to see the final film to find out more.
Yes, that was like a great sell. Go and watch it in the cinema.
When will it be finished?
Oh, that's an even more interesting question. Sorry, Emily.
I go to the executive producer.
It's finished, except for the sound, the music clearance, and hopefully we will have... we're basically waiting for clearance on one track, but it has been a very slow process. We're using 3 tracks from Polish artists from the 60s and 70s, and it just has been a very slow process and frustrating process for my producers.
Had you written the script for it from the source material?
Actually, my wonderful scriptwriter is in the audience, but I can't... Oh, look, Lena is over there, who adapted the short story, and we've been working together on this and hopefully working on another film together in the future, like right now, next week. Basically, I found the short story and I loved it, but I'm 100% not a writer, and I have to be honest, I'm also not, I like having conversations with the writers I work with, and I love that, but I'm not a writer, and I would never want... at the moment, at least, I can't see myself wanting to be one either in the future.
Okay. Time to throw it open to the audience. Does anybody here have questions for Eva? We've got a roaming microphone, so if anyone's got a question, pop your hand up.
Just regarding the music in the first movie, I really liked it, and I was wondering what was it? It's a kind of violin, I think, or something.
It's violin and cello. Basically, our composer, David Schweitzer. I mean, I love the music. And I met him at the National Film and basically I made the film at the National Film and Television School, and he had studied there. He had actually left, and we started working on the film together. So, and I mean, he's a great composer. I mean, I really love working with him, and I think he did a brilliant job. But it's violin and cello.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
You look confused because I put my glasses on, but now I can't see you, but I can see the audience, so I can see if you put your hands up. The red jumper just there.
Hi, I love the intimacy of strangers. It's brilliant, and I wondered how you get such great sound when you're so far away. So it's just a practical question because it's really great.
My God, secret. No, it's actually one. I mean, if you watch the film, you can actually see the microphones. So they were very one-directional microphones. I mean, we did a lot of tests in terms of how to actually do it. At one point, we had hidden cameras, and then but I didn't like the aesthetic of that.
So was it a boom?
Oh no! I mean, so basically, we had a lot of different sound recorders working on it, but when you look at the film, there's this one main guy who talks about whole his life, and in one of the shots, basically, you see this young guy with a skateboard sitting in front of him, and actually you can actually see the mic on the skateboard. So if you watch the film, you can actually spot the mics because they're kind of disguised in different ways. So the microphones were hidden, the cameras were out in the open, and we went through process. I mean, it was a learning process. It was really tough. I mean, we learned that when people walk around, that it's almost impossible. It's also almost impossible to get the beginning of conversations because you never know when they start. Sometimes we got lucky. And also we learned, I mean, we had 2 filming periods. In the second filming period, we actually used an actress and to record the sound for us. And one of the reasons we did that was actually because she felt more comfortable getting close to people, because in her mind she could just come up with scenarios, and she's like, okay, I'm going over there and I'm sitting next to this person because of this. While in the first filming period we had like 3 kind of sound recorders at any given time, we had 2 cameras, and it was very messy and complicated. And the second filming period, we learned from that, and we actually just had 1 camera, and we had her with a microphone.
But obviously she could, even when people are facing away from us, she could then be recording from the front. So sometimes I was amazed that someone could be facing away from the camera and yet you were still picking up what they were saying. But I guess if you weren't recording from the point of the camera.
I mean, one of the things actually, people, generally speaking, in the film have very little headroom. I mean, looking space. And it's actually framed so they're kind of like very close to the edge of frame looking out. And one of the reasons actually, one was logistically, that's actually where the microphone had to be in order to get the sound. But also because for me the film was all about miscommunication and people not connecting. So for me that was also visually trying to do something like that.
And just a quick supplementary practical question about the intimacy of strangers. At what point did you approach people about using that conversation in the film? Or is that another secret?
And it's actually weird because Danielle, who was one of the producers on it, is actually here as well. We asked them afterwards. We finished the conversation. And the reason for that was basically that I felt that if we asked them beforehand, the conversations would feel staged and stilted. And in order to get, I guess what I wanted to try to say in the film was important that they would actually be real. So we approached them after we filmed them and recorded them, which in itself, obviously, I mean, throws up a lot of questions. Weirdly enough, at the time, that was actually legally, that was fine. But it's weird actually because when I had the idea for the film, I was still at the BBC, and we actually checked with a couple of BBC lawyers, and actually the privacy laws in the UK were actually such that if you're in a public space and you're deciding to have this conversation, then that's okay. Because I wasn't interested in the other side of the conversation. But obviously because I did it for the NFTS, I mean, we did approach people and ask them.
Great. More questions?
Hi there. I just want to say I enjoyed all the films.
Thank you.
What kind of research do you do for all of your films, any of your films, other than interviewing people, do you ever consult archives, libraries, articles? Not just you, but maybe also your crew, the crew that you work with?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it depends on the film. Like, I have another film screening in the festival, Blackout, on Saturday, set in Guinea, and I spoke to a lot of like university academics as well as people specializing in the country as well. It's about electricity poverty in Guinea, so actually people specializing in that, and as well as people actually working there, living there. So absolutely. I mean, with Solitary Life of Cranes, I mean, there was obviously a lot of practical research of actually spending time with the crane drivers, going up on cranes, I mean, speaking to them, actually just being with them and understanding what was important to them. So it kind of completely different. I mean, with Steel Homes, I spent a lot of time in self-storage centers, as well as obviously researching like the history of self-storage. It wasn't as such important for this film, but I still kind of obviously researched it. But it kind of depends. It's like it depends on the film. Like with Reindeer, which kind of is really the odd one out. And I really love the film, but it doesn't quite fit in this, because it was a commissioned piece. I was asked to go to Lapland to make a film about reindeer herding, actually about reindeer racing, and it just happened that there was no racing that year because it was too warm. And I was out there and I was like, okay, what can I film? Need to come back with something, and I have 3 days. But I mean, even there, I mean, obviously I researched the Sami culture up to a certain point, and I looked into reindeer herding and everything. So absolutely. But it depends on the film. I mean, some films are also like, I mean, some films is less important and some films is way more important. Like with the Guinea film, it was really important to understand the background of the country and the issue. While with Solitary Life of Cranes, it was really more about understanding the drivers and being there and experiencing it.
And if anybody wants to see that Blackout set in Guinea, then it's screening at the Roxy this Saturday afternoon. Was there another hand? Yes.
Hi. I was wondering, in The Intimacy of Strangers, how many people you filmed actually said yes, they would be willing for you to use their script for their conversation, and how many conversations do you think you filmed that didn't make it into the final cut?
I think that's a question for my producer. No, I'm kidding, Danielle. Surprisingly, actually, a lot said yes. And I did go into the film thinking at least 50% of the people would say no. And in the end of the day, a lot more people said yes. But I do have to preempt that, and I have to be honest about it. It was also because it was made through the National Film and Television School, and there's a lot of goodwill towards students making films. I don't know if I had made the film for the BBC or Channel 4. Beyond that, they would have never commissioned it because I couldn't have told them what the film would have been about. I mean, in the sense that I had no control of conversations, but it's also like, I mean, maybe people would have been less inclined to say yes. But actually, they were surprisingly, a lot of them said yes, way more than I thought. I think there were only like 3 times, I think, when people were really unhappy. And once we actually explained to them why we were doing it and why we are not telling them beforehand, and we told them that we would not use it, if they were unhappy, they were actually fine. But yeah, I mean, it's the obvious question, and it was surprising. I mean, I have to say.
When you have such a conceptual approach, how do you keep that concept through the editing period, and how do you work with your editor? That's actually a genuine question.
My God, Sonia, it's hard. I mean, the films are obviously found in the edit. I mean, that goes without saying. I guess most of these films, I work with one editor. And I guess it's about understanding how we both work. And Emiliano and I work together on these films and kind of like making sure that we it's an interesting question, but I don't know how to answer it. I actually have to be honest, because the concept is there, and that is fundamentally the overriding thing in the films. So it is actually just going. I don't actually think we ever lost it at any point. It's just there. It's how it was filmed, so the material is shaped by it, if that makes sense. The one that probably was the trickiest was Intimacy of Strangers, because of the lack of control over the material. and so we tried different ways of actually shaping it, but it also became very clear the one that actually worked was that love story from the beginning to the end. With Solitary Love of Cranes, I mean, I think, yes, it was an exploration of, up to a certain point, loneliness and isolation and being separated from the world. And that kind of shaped it through, and obviously my visual style was supposed to reinforce that, but I think interesting. I can't answer it, basically. I'd meet you in the bar afterwards.
Well, that's the other thing to say. Lots more time to talk to Eva in the bar afterwards, thanks to Lighthouse. Eva, before we wrap this conversation up and head to the bar, could I just ask you to tell us a little bit about the feature film that you're working on that was a Sundance Screenwriting Lab selection? You went on a Sundance Screenwriting Lab, yes. And it's Let the Northern Lights Erase Your Name. What can you tell us about that? So basically, I mean, actually the best part of that story is actually, and I think it's particularly good if there are any aspiring filmmakers there, because or even otherwise, it is actually kind of such a weird way how that film came about, and it's such a great story. So if the film ever gets made, I think it's the perfect Q&A story. So I had made Reindeer, and that was screening at Telluride Film Festival. And on the opening night of Telluride, and that was my second time there, I was invited to the opening night dinner, and I ended up sitting at this table with this incredibly nice couple, and I was incredibly jet-lagged. And I had no idea who they were. And we talked mainly actually about Scandinavian crime fiction and stories. And I told them my film, and they were saying, oh, we will try and come and see it, because we actually want to see the feature with it. And then I didn't really see them again. I saw the husband again, and then I realized who he was, and that was fine. And then I had no idea if they came to my screening. And then the last day of the festival, I was talking to the festival director, thanking him for inviting me again, and how much I enjoyed the experience. And he was saying, oh, did Vendela talk to you? And I was saying, honestly, at that time, I had forgotten Vendela. It's like, no idea. And he's saying, oh, she's this writer, and she's written, and she came to see a film, and she's got this novel set in Lapland, and she saw your film, and she thought it would be perfect to kind of direct the adaptation of a novel. Which is kind of like, 3 minutes, reindeer running around circles, narrative feature about fundamentally a woman actually going to Lapland to find herself and find out the secrets of her past. It was a bit of a jump, but I went home. I got her email address, I emailed her, I bought the book, read the book. We started talking, and then a month later, I was invited by Sundance to apply for the Screenwriters Lab, because they had watched another one of my films, 10 minutes, very most experimental film I've ever made, about London at night, has no story whatsoever. But they watched that, and they decided that they wanted to invite me to apply for the Screenwriters Lab, and I was really thinking, what is wrong with the world? It's like, it's like, they are so not the films which would think, oh, yeah, get her to make a narrative fiction feature. But that's how it came about. And basically, so Let the Northern Lights Erase Your Name is a novel written by Vendela Vida. She's an American novelist. She's written 5 books, a couple of non-fiction books and novels. Also done a screenplay together with her husband for Sam Mendes, Away We Go. And we've been working through, basically we applied for Sundance together. We got invited to the Screenwriters Lab last January and went there, then went on to the Directors Lab, another Screenwriters Lab, Sound Design Lab, Producing Summit. So we've been working on the development of the film for the last year, and we actually just joined forces with wonderful producers in the audience, Fly Film, to actually make it, which is really exciting. And it's been an incredible, the Sundance Labs are an incredibly intense experience. Very hard. Stretching, but also I had dinner with Catherine Bigelow, and I was like, wow. It's like, it's still the high, forget about Skywalker, that was actually the highlight of my year. I was like, wow, I love Catherine Bigelow. So, you have incredibly good advisors coming in, and they're tough with you, but they also really fundamentally just want you to make the best film possible. So we spend a lot of time developing the film, and hopefully, I'm looking at randomly in the audience, making it later this year, next year, maybe 2 years, 5, 10. Let's not give up. So
And it's a story about a 28-year-old American woman who basically finds out that her father wasn't her real father on the day of his funeral. And then she sets out on this journey to actually find out the secrets of her past. Her mother left her when she was 14. She never knew why. And basically her journey leads her from San Francisco, where she lives, to Lapland.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you the very best of luck with the development and making of that. Look forward to seeing it, and also field study. And please join me in saying a huge warm thank you to Eva for being here tonight.